God, I appreciate that he's willing tonight to come and spend some free time tonight, his volunteer time to share these things with us. And Lord, what we're asking is we just want to be good stewards. We want to be lights in the world. We want to be effective as Christians while we're here on this earth. And so, God, we understand down through the years that as we've tried to walk this path and follow you, that been a lot of things we don't know. And God, you've shown us that. But God, you also give us a zeal and a desire to know more and to understand and to just help people wherever they're at. So God, I pray tonight you'd bless this time together, help us with this information, and if you lay it on our lap in sometime in the near future to use some of this, God, I just pray to be to your glory. And God, we just love people like you do. And God, we bring you the glory you deserve. So we love you and thank you. Help our church to be the Christians we're supposed to be and be as effective as we can for the kingdom. In Jesus' name we pray. And amen. Amen. All right. You guys may be seated. And this seat has already gave out on me. So that's very frustrating. So Jonathan's sitting up higher than me, and that's all right. So tonight, I guess, does most people in here know Jonathan? I think most people do. Some people you don't. So this is a bunch of in-laws are here in this area. And Jonathan grew up in Charleston, right? And went to the Mountain Mission for a long time before Brooke dragged him to Jackson County. And so right now working at Castos. So the first question we've all got, which by the way, Jonathan, when I asked him to come, very willing to do it, and he was preparing to think about what to bring, and he asked me, he said, well, what do you think about maybe bringing like a hearse and a casket and stuff like that? And I was all for it, because I thought it'd been great. We could have the casket up here, y'all could have climbed in it and practiced, making sure you knew how to lay right and everything, and you don't want to blow that, in your big funeral day, but he said he couldn't get it cleared, so we'll just have to go with it like it is. But one of the biggest questions, how in the world did you end up a funeral director?
Sure. So at the age of 14, had a pretty significant loss in my life. My grandpa died. At the time, we always used Cunningham's in Charleston. That's where I'm from. That's who we used. Something about the funeral director impressed me. The way he handled himself, the way he handled the family, and not only the way that the funeral director handled himself and the family, but the art of embalming. That was something that I was just completely interested in. So at the age of 14, I knew it was a calling on my life to be a funeral director. A lot of times I tried to honestly run from it. I thought about clown school, which is a complete opposite of being a funeral director. I thought about, what else can I get into? What do you like as a kid? Monster trucks. Who wouldn't want to drive a monster truck, right? So even applied for it. Didn't get anywhere with that. So my calling is being a funeral director, and my main thing was, how can I help people? And this was my way to help others. Anybody know who Glenn Payne is? I'm sure. Glenn Payne sang with the Cathedrals, baritone singer, lead singer.
Remember the Cathedrals? I didn't know his name. Okay.
So Glenn Payne sang a song that said, if I can help somebody along the way, then my living won't be in vain. So not only to be a funeral director, but it's also a ministry in order to help others. Regardless of faith, regardless of what you believe or what others believe, we're here to be a service to the community. And so it's extremely rewarding. It's not a career that you make a ton of money. You're not going to become rich on it, which is perfectly fine. You can keep the money. I just want to help somebody, and this is my way.
Awesome. So what did you have to do for that? What does a funeral director have to do? You have to go to school for...
So to be a funeral director in the state of West Virginia, now every state is different. Ohio, for instance, has more stringent education requirements and continuing education, those things. West Virginia requires you to receive either 60 quarter hours of an undergraduate degree or an associate degree, and then also you have to serve 1 year apprenticeship. Now this apprenticeship is served under a licensed funeral director. You got to do so many funerals, you got to do so many embalmings, and then you go to mortuary school. Around here, most of your funeral directors either went to Pittsburgh, which is where I went, or Cincinnati, which is in Cincinnati, or Mid-America, which is in Indiana. So once you complete that, you've got to take a national board exam, which consists of, I think it's about 200 to 250 questions for an art section, and then also a science section. So the sciences include chemistry, anatomy, microbiology, pathology, thanatochemistry, all those things are included in that, so you can be well informed.
Sounds like a great time.
It is.
100%.
It is. Now, the art sections are more of, your laws, psychology, grief counseling, all those things. So the art section, flew through it perfect. And I had about an hour and a half to spare. Sciences were a little bit more difficult. I took the full 3 hours to make sure that I was going to pass that. And finally I came to a point. If I'm not going to pass it now, that's all right. I'll just do it again until I do. So after that, you got to take a state examination, which consists of all the laws here in the state of West Virginia, pre-need, proper sanitation, disinfection, all that stuff that is included in the funeral homes. So national boards, we passed it first time, thank God, because I'm not a good test taker. And then state boards, we were able to pass that first time too. So it was meant to be.
Yeah. So you've been at Castos, well, this is your second stint then, right?
Yeah.
So
2015, met Brooke. I was halfway, maybe more than halfway through mortuary school. Came to Jackson County because I was getting married. Got married, moved her over top of the funeral home, which I think was a big shock to her.
dedicated funeral director right here.
Dedicated, yeah. That's where we also brought Bella. Actually, her nursery is still set up in the apartment. So that's interesting. So was here from 15 all the way through 17, started my apprenticeship under J.W. Casto. He's been a great asset. The Casto family's been a great asset. They really encourage younger funeral directors. Not a lot of people's going into this industry. And actually, believe it or not, 70-30 is what the ratio is in mortuary schools now. 70% is now women, 30% is now men. So it's took a switch. It used to be predominantly a man business, but thank God for the women that want to go into this business because they make great funeral directors and great embalmers. Attention to detail is everything, and so we thank God for them too.
Huh. Well, very good. So Jonathan do you count your funerals?
I do not.
I don't know if you're a statistics major and you keep track of all these because it'd be kind of weird if you did. No, I'm just kidding.
We can look back.
He's got records at the funeral. So he's done many of these. I know he said he had to do apprenticeships and all these things. So what we're going to talk about tonight is kind of both two different things. Is one, you're going to have to see him or somebody like him, when a family member dies or something like that. As far as I know, that's a state law, right? You're going to get involved somehow with. A funeral director is going to get involved with every single death in this state. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, in some way, shape, or form. Now, again, you still have options on to what level,
yep.
But you will have to deal with somebody from his world when a family member passes away, a church member, anything. So we're going to start at the beginning. What you can do to pre-plan some of this stuff, and some of you, just out of curiosity, has anybody done any funeral pre-planning? Not mean you've been to a funeral home and done something for somebody who's already passed away, but has anybody done any pre-planning anything? Ooh. Oh, Wanda has. She's scared to admit it, but she has. It's not something you brag about, isn't it? Like, they don't give you a T-shirt that says, I pre-planned. And...
My brother-in-law is a funeral director.
Very nice.
Okay.
Retired.
Okay, great. Good. Okay, so he's going to let you know this is what some of you may want to be thinking about, or some of you may want to be, if you have elderly family members who haven't done any of this, you may in some way tactfully may want to think about some of these things, and I'll just let him have the floor, let him talk through what pre-planning, what things to think about ahead of time that can help later on down the road when you're in the middle of this process.
Sure. So, number one, I'm a note person. If I don't have notes, I'm going to lose my train of thought. So first off, know that funeral directors are here to help. We're not here to hurt you, not here to take you down a road that you shouldn't go. So that's the first thing, is funeral directors help families begin the healing process. Not only that, we're also listeners, advisors, providers of grief and bereavement groups, counseling, pamphlets, things like that. We also plan tributes. What happens at the end of your life, even at need, how can we celebrate your life as a unique person? We also complete all legal paperwork. This includes completing a certified death certificate in the state that you pass away in. Also, all the other legal paperwork such as Social Security, notifying insurances, coordinating flowers, ministers, contacting cemeteries on your behalf, So all those things are included in that. So why is it encouraged that we plan in advance? First off, it offers a degree of emotional and sometimes financial stability. It relieves your family of having to make any important decisions during a period of grief and stress. If you've ever been extremely stressed out and you go somewhere, you need to make a decision, is it easy or is it hard? Something you don't want to think about, you come to us and we're going to ask you a ton of information about that individual, all the biographical information, so we can complete that death certificate, so we can formulate that obituary. And then also, we're going to start talking about who you may need to see in weeks and months ahead, such as probate, wills, estates, what to do with those. Is there any rights or things from Social Security that can benefit a spouse or dependent children? So all those things are included. And also gives you and your family peace of mind knowing that your funeral will be conducted according to your wishes. So I'm not the same as Joey. Joey's not the same as Brandon. Brandon's not the same as Mark. We all have unique personalities, special interests, things like that. So that being said, why should every funeral be the same? It really shouldn't be. Because just because Grandpa did it this way or Mom, Dad did it this way, it doesn't mean that that's going to be how I want to be remembered or how my life should be celebrated. So when you pre-plan it, you can write down specific wishes. Here's the songs I want. Here's what I want on my casket. Here's what kind of casket, what type of vault if the cemetery requires it. Here's the specific Bible verses, poems, things like that to be read at my funeral. All that's taken care of pre-death, so your family doesn't have to be left to wondering what's going to happen.
So I'm sure there's some people in here that has gone to a funeral that wasn't pre-planned and had to figure all that stuff out, right? How many people's been there? Yeah, a lot of you. And of course, that's where pastors sometimes come in. We come and visit those situations too. And so I don't know how you guys dealt with that or what that process was like, but from the outside looking in, because I haven't walked through that, to me it looks like a ton of questions. Because I know there's an unreal amount of stuff that you have to think about, and you just lost somebody. So I can't imagine all that, what that process is like. But so I know, like Jonathan was saying, when you go see him, he's got questions. I know when I show up, I got questions. Does anybody want to talk during the funeral? Do you have any stories you want me to bring out? What was their favorite this? What was their favorite? And so I have almost all, maybe one funeral that I can think of that I have done that the person actually had everything ahead of time figured out. Your sister Marge. Yep. Yep. She was, yeah. She knew her clothes. She knew the songs. She had a lot of it down, what she wanted, and all that was squared away. And she was, if anybody knew Marge, and you did, she was the kind of person that had tons of joy over taking the burdens off of other people. She would, that's what she did, never want to be a burden to anybody. You know what I mean? So if she could go down and do stuff like that, it did. So anyways, to say all this, to say that's kind of why what Jonathan's talking about, where our minds think about, why are we talking about this on a Wednesday night in church? Well, because the Christian values are there to ease burdens, carry burdens, make them light, walk through it with each other. This is what it looks like in real life. And so these are some of the situations that you can do and he can do. So when somebody does come down to see you and they say, hey, I want to pre-plan a funeral, where do you go from there?
Sure.
What are you after?
So first thing we do, I always ask, what type of tribute, what are you wishing for at the time? Some people already know. They'll say, we want a traditional funeral. Some people say we want to be cremated with a memorial service. Some people say, we want to have a traditional service and then cremation. There are as many options for burial as there is cremation. First thing we want people to be is informed. Know all of your options. Even before you come to a funeral home, do your research. There are certain things like embalming, for instance, that is not required by law. It's a common myth to think, people think that it is. It's not required by law unless there's a public visitation or some type of viewing, or you're going to be placed in a mausoleum. That's the walls, crypts, things like that, that require you to be embalmed. There is no law for that. Vaults, now these are outer burial containers that go over the casket in the ground. There is no state or federal law that says you have to purchase one of those. The cemeteries that you go to, certain cemeteries, they have that requirement. Most of your country cemeteries don't. So after that, I kind of get a feel of what folks want, and to start guiding them along the way. Here's everything that's included in that, things to consider, and then we go through the options. So there is a thing called pre-planning. This is whenever you come and you just want to plan out what's going to happen. Doesn't necessarily mean prepay. So there's two different things there. Most commonly, they're commingled. So you're going to pre-plan. That's going to be planning plus paying for something somehow. So prepaying. Three different options. Of course, every funeral home is different. The three options that we have in our funeral home is through, number one, a traditional trust. Now, it used to be, and sorry, bankers, anybody that works in the banking industry.
Oh, not anymore?
Funeral trust accounts used to be taken through CDs through a bank, savings accounts through a bank. However, once we were pulling those back out of the bank, your rate of return was 0.01%. It was not keeping up with inflation. So as funeral homes, as funeral directors, it's our duty to be good stewards over your money, to see how we can get you the best rate of return coming back at the time of need. So we started investing in the West Virginia Funeral Trust. So first option is folks come in, they go ahead and make all the selections. Now this is the services, what you want done, visitation, funeral service, graveside, all those things included. And then we look at merchandise, so our casket. And we start, here's the minimum metal casket, and they go all the way up to $10,000 for a solid bronze. So it depends where you need to be financially and where you want to be.
Are you allowed to do a pine box?
You can do a pine box.
Okay, I was going to say, 'cause I always get those people say, well, I just want to be in,
Pine box.
So
yeah.
So seriously though, I mean, like, you don't have to be, you could be buried on a farm, right? I mean,
That's correct.
On your home.
If it's private property and there are no city ordinances that prohibit you from being buried on your property, you can be.
Okay.
You don't have to be buried in a cemetery. And it happens quite often, honestly. It does. So that's the first options through the trust. Now, what this option does is you go ahead and you purchase everything today. So you supply the funeral home with, let's say the bill is $9,800. You supply the funeral home for $9,800. We write the funeral trust, the money. In addition to that, any pre-need contract here in the state of West Virginia has to be registered with the State Attorney General's office. Now, they make you pay $20 to record that, and also the families get a letter stating, we've received this contract, that you're in contract with so-and-so funeral home. Now, what this does is it safeguards that pre-need. So heaven forbid the funeral home ever closed down, shut down, or just completely close, or whatever the case may be. At the time the contract is needed, number one, the pre-need can be transferred to a funeral home of your choice. So our funeral home's not around anymore, you can choose a funeral home to go to. The State Attorney General's office will have a copy of that contract, and they also know where all the funding is for that contract. So that's the first option. Now that guarantees your professional services, which is the basic services of our funeral director and staff, the embalming, dressing, and casketing, the use of the facility for the visitation, the funeral, the use of the staff and equipment for the graveside service, the use of the hearse, the removal from place of death to the funeral home, and also a flower car or a service car. All that's called professional services. It also guarantees your merchandise, whether it's the casket, the vault, printed materials, that's the register book, memorial folders that folks will sign and pick up when they come to the funeral home, and any other merchandise items that the family may select or that you may select. Now, things that we cannot guarantee are things like death certificates, state sales tax, opening and closing of graves, things like that, because those are going to be called third-party accommodations. So we can put money aside for those things, and the trust can build on that. However, if those things change, then that may be the only additional thing that the family has to come up with. Now, the good thing with this, in the funeral trust, and this is a lot of information, I get it. In the funeral trust, luckily, even through COVID, we have seen a rate of return between 4 to 7%. That's huge. You know, and a couple years ago, pre-COVID, we were seeing 8 to 11%.
A year?
A year.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's really, 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 really good on these accounts.
So basically, if you guys would put $10,000 pre-planning your funeral, then a year from there it'd be $10,400 or $10,700.
And it's based off the market. Now, this approach is very conservative. They're very cautious on how they, where they put the monies and things like that.
Safe investments.
Yeah. Now, that being said, so at the time that the contract is needed, and this is a big misconception and what people don't get. Yes, you have pre-planned, and those monies are there to not cost your family any more out of pocket at the time for those professional services and the merchandise. The funeral home can use the interest off of these accounts to offset the cost at the time that it's needed. Does that make sense? And that's a big thing. Like, you know, we come back at the time that the contract's needed, and we have to put what today's costs are going to be. Because technically, yes, that is what you're being charged. However, if that trust account doesn't keep up, the funeral home has to assume loss for those professional services and the merchandise. Now, if those trusts keep up so much that there's money's left over, by law, we have to give that back to your family. We cannot keep that.
Okay.
That's option number one. Option number two is a depository trust, very similar to the first one. However, certain families or some families, you know, don't want to go ahead and spend that much money all at once. That's a big hit for anybody, especially in today's time. So a depository trust gives the families options and the ability to just make payments. There is no set payment, weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly, but whenever you can put money in that account. And then once your account reaches to cover that first option, then we roll it over. Third option is through a whole life insurance policy. You can assign that to a funeral home for final expenses. Here in the state of West Virginia, it is illegal to put a funeral home as a beneficiary on a policy. So don't do that. Don't do that.
They'll take your corpse to jail if you try to do that.
Now, what this does, it secures your policy. Should you ever have to go into long-term nursing care, hospital stays, because those whole life policies, they have a cash surrender value. So this secures that policy. It's not considered an asset to you. Some people have to do what's called a Medicaid spend down. So you come to us and say, hey, you know, we're having a lot of health issues. We're trying to get her on Medicaid or get him on Medicaid. And so we can secure monies. We can secure that insurance policy to where it's not considered an asset. And then you would be able to qualify for the proper care that you need.
Okay. That sounds like something people do.
Now, the only thing with the life insurance is because the money is invested through an insurance company and not through the funeral home to where we can oversee where that money goes, we can't guarantee the cost. Because you may stop paying on it, and then at the time there is no policy to be found.
Yeah.
So that's the only thing with the life insurance.
Does anybody got any questions on that stuff? The paying ahead and what that means and what that covers and what that doesn't? Pretty good, pretty straightforward. Somebody's like, I don't want anything to do with this anyway. But, okay, so that's good. So, yeah, if there's a few things, if I pay now, it doesn't matter if they go up or not, they're covered. But then there's a handful of things that do change as time goes by. And so if what I put in didn't cover that, then I still may have to pay a little bit at the time of funeral.
Just a little bit.
But it won't be significant. It won't be for all the different stuff.
No.
Okay.
No.
Very good.
And not only do you prepay for that, but there is no question. I want to share this real quickly. And one question, how do you want to be remembered? You know, are your wishes known to your family, to your spouse, to a close friend? What I would encourage is write things down. Keep it in a safeguard, you know, a safety deposit box. Take it to the funeral home. Just say, hey, I ain't going to prepay for anything right now, but can you keep it in a safe place for me for when the time comes? We can do that.
You'll actually keep
We do.
notes?
People's wishes, yeah.
So how does the family know? I mean, the family will have to know that, right? I mean, I mean, if somebody in my family did that but didn't tell me, and then they end up coming to your funeral home, will you automatically look for that, or
Absolutely.
you really do?
What we do is we keep card files on everybody, whether it's wishes, whether it's trust accounts, whether it's insurance policies. We have something on the computer that if I type your name up, it's going to bring you up. It's going to say this is in the wishes and here's what they desired. If you're in an obituary anywhere, I can find that too. Even from, let's see, that was 1953, all the way back to then, I can find it.
All right, so let's just clear this up. I've had several people over the years pastoring Arnold that walk up to me and be like, now when I'm my funeral, I want you to, and then you know what, I'd have no clue what any of y'all said. Like, it's gone. Unless you guys died like that week, I'm going to forget. So would you go down and tell him what it is you want done at your funeral, and so I won't forget. I might get you confused with Jonathan and be like, yeah, he wanted to be a monster truck driver.
And a clown. Can't forget
And a
the
clown. He was a clown. No, I'm just kidding. So that's cool. I did not know you did that, and I'm actually surprised you keep him for that long and you automatically check. That's really cool.
Yeah. On a personal note, so talking about, how you want to be remembered, things like that, making your wishes known to your family. A couple years ago, and those of you who know who I am and know my family, a couple years ago on a Sunday, I went to church with Mom. It was always Mom, Grandma, Sarah, or that's my aunt, and sometimes siblings. So on a Sunday, me and Mom was just casually sitting around. We went to church together. She loved I Know a Man Who Can, and for some reason I was impressed to sing that song that morning. So sing that song. We were sitting in the living room. I said, Mom, if something ever happened to you, what do you want done? Just out of curiosity, you just want to know, because you never know unless you tell somebody. She said, well, here's what I want. And I said, well, why do you want that? She said, because it's cheap. I said, I get it. I said, well, start looking at life insurance. I said, there's tons of options out there to help you. And she said, well, I am. And Dad said, oh, yeah, by the way, I've got this paper here, and I'm going to send it to the life insurance company, and we're going to go ahead and get life insurance for both of us. Her birthday was November the 1st. She just turned 48. So that was a Sunday. On Tuesday, she became ill. Thursday, she died. Like that. So here we are, sitting in the hospital, and thinking, would she really have wanted that? Or is that just something that she said because it's cheap? And I thought, there's no way I'm doing that. And of course, being the funeral director in the family, everybody's like, Jonathan, what do we do? So, well, don't put that on me. We've got siblings and Dad's here. So we ended up doing what we thought she would have probably done, had she been financially stable to do that, or had some type of pre-arrangements, pre-funding, whatever the case may be. So not only did she die suddenly at 48, but that put a massive strain on our family. Emotionally, even as a funeral director, I had no idea what to do. And I'm trained in this stuff.
Yeah, bless you, John.
Had no idea. Financially speaking, Dad wasn't financially stable to support a funeral. So went and took out a loan, and that's how I buried my mom. So we did what we thought was right, or what I thought was right, and clearing that with everybody in the family. Something that was encouraged to me, and during a funeral or during any arrangements, and I always encourage every family I serve to do this, number one, never have any regrets. You're there to celebrate their life. Number two is do what you feel is right to honor them. So that being said, Mom loved I Know a Man Who Can, and so I sang that at her funeral. One of the hardest things to do, but we got through it. And that, though she died suddenly, I knew she was a Christian, so that was, a big security for me. And I had the hope. Now, my dad, on the other hand, who's not saved, said, well, I hope she got into heaven. I said, Dad, you don't determine that. I said, that's a personal relationship between her and God. And he still sometimes will question that. Well, I hope she got into heaven. I hope I didn't do anything. I said, Dad, it doesn't concern you. It's a personal relationship between her and God. So that's just a personal story. That's why, I'm passionate about what I do. Don't have any regrets, and make your wishes known so you're not sitting with another funeral director questioning, is this the right step? Is this the right casket? We think she might like this music. We think she might like these flowers. So personalize it and make it known.
I was thinking as you was telling that, I remember one funeral I went to as well, and a lot of people in here would know who it was, but it was service for a young girl who died in a car wreck, and her dad actually did the speaking and stuff at the service, and he's telling some stories in it, but I'll never will forget that type of that courage to do that. You know what I mean? To stand up there and to his own daughter's funeral, no doubt in the middle of grieving and having to deal with all that, addressing people and telling kind of what he went through and just being open and honest. But to me, it always it was an example of somebody who didn't have it all together and it wasn't perfect, but he was dealing with it.
Sure.
You know what I mean? That's how, like he was talking about, it was really hard to do to sing. I know, but it's like, well, this is part of dealing with it. I've got to deal with this. I've got to do what I got to do because this is what's important, and I'm going to go through it, and I'm not going to let it, But I remember up to that point, it seemed like a lot of funerals to me seemed like just hurry up and get it over with and try to stay away from it because of the uncomfort it felt. And you can handle those things however you want to handle them, but and that's personal again as it goes through it, how you go through it. But it made me in that moment reinforce kind of what I thought is I want to deal with things the right way, and I don't want to be just because I'm too lazy and I'm thinking about West Virginia football too much instead of preparing myself to deal with real life. You know what I mean? And that's what you're talking about because that's very real.
Sure is.
Very real to sit with your mom on a Sunday and bury her on. Where she passed away.
The following Monday.
Yeah.
That also being said, a couple months after that, I personally ended up developing some type of infection in my throat, ended up going septic. Was seen 4 times before that. Now what was that, 2019? I was 25 when I buried Mom, so I was 26. Was seen 3 or 4 times before that, high fevers, things like that. Went to a Charleston hospital, because that's where I'm from, that's where I'm comfortable, and they said, you went septic. And they said, if you did not come in here tonight, you'd have been dead.
Well, they were getting ready to discharge you.
They were getting ready to discharge me, yeah. And I remember the nurse coming in.
Wait, but they're getting ready to discharge you and then they figure out?
Well, I went septic after that.
Okay, after that, okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
So, they give you that nasty stuff to be able to do a CAT scan or whatever. Didn't stay down at all. Might have, yeah. So
we get the
anyway,
picture.
Yeah. So, thankfully, something just impressed us to get to the hospital. And I remember the nurse coming in, he said, are you sure you feel okay? I said, well, no, not really. I said, something just feels really funny up in here, like my head's swelling. I look funny. My wife says I look like a ghost. What's going on? And if I didn't go in that night, I'd have been dead. Now, at that time, I had a wife, I had a mortgage, I had a car payment, I had 2 babies. Just Tucker was a couple months old. And I had no life insurance and no way to support that family. So after that, ended up getting life insurance. So it doesn't matter whether you're 20 years old or all the way to 103. That's the oldest I've ever buried. Or even down to 5, 4, 3, 2, infant. There's always options out there, and you're never too young to start thinking about this. My wishes are known to her. My wishes are known to my boss. He knows what casket I want, and she knows to take me back to Cross Lanes to bury me if something happens. So it doesn't matter your age. You're never too young to think about this. I've got life insurance on both of my kids. I've got one on the way, and she'll be here in November. I'm going to get life insurance on her. It doesn't matter. You can never be prepared enough for this.
Very good. Anything else on the pre-planning stuff, or is that most things people need to know on the beforehand? Anybody got any questions about anything else that you were not sure what you'd experience if you wanted to go down and do something ahead of time? Because if not, we're going to switch over to the gear where, okay, now somebody died and you have to go down there. All right. So now this is the part that I think probably a lot of you have walked through and can walk through, and probably the majority. What percentage of people pre-plan that you deal with? I mean, how often do you do a service as pre-planning versus not?
I would say probably 40 to 50% are
Really?
pre-planned. Yeah.
Man, people got it together better than I give them credit for. I'll be honest. I think all the people in Jackson County that I know are part of the 50% that doesn't do this. So, you are my people. So, here's the part that I really wanted Jonathan to spend a few minutes on, and I think this is because here's where we're at. You guys have been in this foggy moment when someone passes away, and then you do have to you have to notify a funeral director, have to be in touch with them. And I was reading somewhere, and I don't know how all this process works because I think it depends on how it happens. But pretty much, you're usually getting a call the day of or the day after, right? I mean, depending on if they was in a hospital or if they just passed away at home.
Correct.
You're pretty well getting notified.
Immediately.
Pretty well immediately.
Yeah. Unless you're in specific hospitals, and I'm not going to say who they are. Sometimes they wait like 24 hours just because there's a procedure. If you die in an institution, there's a center of organ donation that tries to get in contact with families. That's a fantastic thing. I'm not here to persuade you either way or, one way or the other. But they have to go through that. They have to contact the state medical examiner's office. Every single death here in the state of West Virginia has to go through the medical examiner's office. Doesn't mean they're going to take the body, if there's a probable cause of death. They have to be notified. That's their legal way. So once the funeral home is notified, and this could be through the daytime, 2, 3 a.m., funeral director is always notified, and we always send somebody out to take that individual into our care. If it happens through the nighttime, the next morning I would anticipate a call from the funeral director, just if you're not pre-planned, to get an idea of what you wanted for services, or what your family's wishes are if you didn't make it known. And at that point, we'll set up a time for the arrangement for you to come in. Always encouraged to bring clothing. If the individual was a veteran, we encourage to bring a DD-214 because there's certain benefits from the Veterans Administration for our veterans. And then, we talk about pictures and things like that. We leave it very, very brief on the phone. I don't want to hold somebody up for 10 to 20 minutes. Now, that being said, there are some people that like to talk, which is perfectly fine. I can talk just as much as anybody else. But, if that's what helps people, if they need to just talk to somebody, that's what we're there for. And that's what we always encourage too. When a family comes in to make arrangements, is that where you want to go?
Yeah, whatever's next on the timeline that somebody has to deal with. Now, with the death certificate part, do they actually have to do that with you, or is that taken care of by somebody else? Because I don't.
Sure. So the funeral home provides the death certificate.
The funeral home does.
Yep.
Okay.
So you come in, and I've got this sheet of all this information I need to get from you: your name, your physical address, your social security number, of course, your date of birth, place of birth, your mom and dad's names. I need your mom's maiden name. If you're married, I need their name plus their maiden name. And then we start going into, how far you went in school. Now, that's not, a lot of times we don't, unless it's like a high school graduate or college degrees, things like that, we don't publish, you went to 8th grade. It's just something statistically that we have to get for the West Virginia death certificates, or any death certificate at that. So we talk about that, talk about your occupation. What did you do most of your working life? How long were you there? Were you part of any groups, civic orders, any type of unions, church, denomination affiliation? Did you do anything within the church? Did you hold any positions? And then we get into your hobbies. What did you like to do? What were your interests? Things like that. And then we get into survivors. Now, this is everybody's names: your spouse, your children, if your parents are still living, things like that. And then other folks that you want to list in the obituary. Once we complete all that, we talk about newspapers. Let you know that every newspaper is going to charge something if you publish an obituary. Used to be newspapers would do obituaries for public service. Well, that's not the case anymore. So our local papers, all the way to Point Pleasant, to Pomeroy, to Gallipolis, if you put something this big, or if you put something this big, they're going to assess some fee. Now, Charleston and Parkersburg, they still allow a free notice. Now, those free notices include your name, when and where services will be. Unfortunately, our local paper only runs 2 days a week now, so that has a determination if families want to place it in our locals. Of course, it's always on funeral home websites. If you got social media, you could share it onto there. So after we talk about that, we get into estate settlements. Asking, did your loved one have a last will and testament? If they did, does your loved one still have tangible assets, things that are deeded or licensed or titled in their name or both of your names as partners or spouses? If so, you have to go through probate to settle that estate. Now, that being said, if there's only a will and they have no tangible assets, you don't have to settle that estate, or there's nothing to settle. You have nothing to take names off of, deeds, titles, things like that. But if you have a will and you have assets, the law is it has to be probated. So we'll give you the instructions for Jackson County. If you're in Mason County, we have a different process for that. Rome County is different too, so it just depends what county you pass away in or where the funeral home is or your assets lie. Once we talk about that, we get into how many death certificates you need. Here in the state of West Virginia, death certificates are $12 a piece. From the state level, now that's the quickest way any funeral home can get your certified death certificate is through the state. Luckily, West Virginia has finally caught up to all the other states, and we're now on an electronic system. Used to be we had the carbon copies, and we'd have to send them off to the doctor and wait, which would take weeks. And then we had to send them to Charleston to get certified, then request those copies, which takes 6 to 8 weeks to get those back. Now everything's electronically. We can get your certified death certificates in 3 to 5 weeks. It's great. Once they're registered in the state of West Virginia or the state, they come back down to the county of residence. So most of the time, where you reside is where your death certificate is going to come back to. So I die, regardless, anywhere in the state, because my assets and my main address is here in Jackson County, my death certificate is going to come back to the county of Jackson. And then you can go to the clerk's office, get them for $5. It's a little bit cheaper, but some families need those additional copies. So that's death certificates. Then we get into what type of services would you like? Whether you want a traditional service, whether you're wanting a cremation service. And most of the time we have that idea on the phone from our conversation. And we go through all that. We start talking about caskets. They start at this price and they go up depending on the quality, the construction that they're made out of, the type of gauge that they're in. And then we talk about vaults if the cemetery requires it. A lot of families commonly get a vault. Most generally, they get some type of outer burial container. And what that does is, first off, it's additional protection for the loved one, and also it protects the integrity of the ground. So if you ever go to a cemetery and you see graves settling, they're sinking in the corners, which is very common. A lot of times they either don't have a vault or the dirt wasn't packed around that vault good enough. Then we talk about register books. And once we go up to the room, you select that casket, the vault, the register book, memorial folders. We start talking about what would you like to have on the inside of that memorial folder. All of ours commonly come with 23rd Psalm, but we can change that to a particular other verse, poem, or if you want a picture on that, that's perfectly fine too. So all that's included. So now we know what type of clothing you are going to wear. We know what type of casket you're going to have. We know what types of services you're going to have. We know when you're going to have the service, where you're going to have the service. Next thing we've got to talk about is flowers. Are you a flower person? Well, okay, so your loved one's not a flower person. Or maybe they say, well, and this is most recent that I had, he liked daisies. Okay, well, the type of casket they selected wasn't the traditional dome top. It was a flat top casket, a wood casket. He was a wood maker. He liked working in his wood shop. He made a career out of that, and that's how he supported his family. So they thought wood options are perfect. Why? Because that's what Dad liked. Number two, they could smell the varnish coming off that wood. And so their thought was, going into Dad's workshop, here's what we always smelled, every time he came in. So they said he wanted daisies. And I said, okay. I said, well, consider this. I said, you told me that he has a lot of woodworking tools, things that he did throughout his life. I said, why don't we create this more about his hobby? Something that he was so passionate about. So what they did, they got a vase of daisies, and then on this flat top casket, they brought his King James Version Bible that he kept in his workshop that had sawdust in it. They brought all of his woodworking tools, and instead of a traditional casket spray, they personalized this casket to reflect him. They also put his favorite suit on. He wanted a black suit, white shirt, red tie. Very traditional funeral attire. And wingtip shoes. Very nice shoes, too. So they came in, and his wife, lovely lady, said, I'd like to see his shoes. So we opened the casket. Top and bottom, we opened it. There's no shame in doing that. We dress everybody as if you're going out. And you always do that. Always treat everybody and dress everybody exactly how they would be seen in public. Nothing's hidden behind the scenes if your integrity's right. So that's how we celebrated his life. And I thought that was very interesting.
Very cool.
Personalization is everything. You don't have to do what everybody else does.
Right.
How do you want to be celebrated?
Going back to the services, because somebody asked me this recently too, and I was thinking about this too. I've only been to one in my life, I think, that was over at this other church. Maybe one or two that I remember having a funeral over here. And I remember having a funeral in this church of a relative that wanted to do one here. But, I mean, the options, you can do those anywhere, right? I mean, if they want to have a funeral service at the church, they just tell you, hey, we don't want to use the funeral home here. We want to go, you do the church. Or we want to do it at our house. Or,
Yep.
I mean, pretty much all that's open, right?
Yep, depending on, okay, we'll start here. So it's common, back in the old days, and I say that respectfully.
Easy.
Respectfully. They used to, contact the undertaker at that time. They'd contact the undertaker, they'd come take the body into their care, do the preparations, get them dressed, get them casketed, transport them back to the home for a 2 to 3 day visitation. And then they would have the service wherever they want. Then it got to the commonplace of having it just in the funeral home, and not so much the 2 to 3 day visitations. It was just the one night before, next day funeral, and now everything's going into one day. It's very uncommon that we're seeing visitations in the evenings. Sometimes, I would say maybe a dozen times in a year now that we're seeing that. Everything's going to one day. It's simpler for the family. Now, that being said, if you want to have a funeral in a church, there's no additional cost to do that. It's the same cost whether it's at the funeral home, at a church. We can have it in a barnyard. We can have it at your house. We can have it in a gymnasium, whatever the case may be. Whatever is most comfortable. That's what we do, but I'm not, knowing the other funeral directors in the community, I would say they'd be the same way. You have a lot of good funeral directors in Jackson County. Okay, so our funeral home, I can only speak what Castos does.
From a cost perspective.
Yeah, cost perspective, it costs nothing more.
Yeah.
Have you noticed a lot of people are not even having funeral services?
That's right.
That seems to be, they'll say there's a memorial service planned later.
So
Is that a lot?
we are, and National Funeral Director Association, which does a lot of those statistics, and they kindly project, here's what's going to happen 20 years down the road. So it's no surprise that cremation is on a rise. Now, some folks are traditional people, some folks like cremation. It doesn't matter, but still celebrate the life somehow. So a couple years ago, National Funeral Director Association projected that in 20 years, the majority of the United States is going to be 60 to 70% cremation rate. So that's what they're projecting. Well, I got word a week and a half ago that NFDA is now projecting within 5 years, cremation is going to be that high. In the state of West Virginia, they're projecting, I think it was 2030, we're going to see about 60 to 70% cremation.
Why is that? Is it cheaper? Is that one of the reasons?
Cost is certainly a big factor. Unfortunately, the economy is not booming right now. So not only does inflation affect the grocery store, inflation affects the gas station, inflation also affects the funeral home. You know, we still have to get goods from somewhere, such as a casket, those things. And so when they raise the cost on us, we have to unfortunately pass that cost on. Regarding monuments, so you could get a traditional gray monument with 2 vases, nice size, 3 foot 6 inches monument. Used to be, back in 2015 to 16 to 17, you could sell one of those for about $1,700. Nice, just a nice monument. Through COVID, those rose 50 to 60%. You're at a point now to where you can get a nice black monument, which you have more options, more availability to do things on those, etchings, it's not just flat sandblasting, for almost the same cost, if not maybe $200 to $300 more for a black one today, but gray is almost head and head with those black monuments. Any off collars in regards to monuments, your reds, blues, all those off collars are going to cost probably 3 to 4 times as much as they used to.
So how much difference is there between being cremated and a traditional
Sure.
burial?
So regarding cremation, so here's how I can answer that question. Is it just a cremation solely? Is it a cremation with a memorial service? Is it a traditional service and then cremation?
Let's just go with a cremation and a memorial service.
Okay. So our particular funeral home, and this is no secret, you can come to our funeral home and you can get a general price list. We're required to give those even to competitors. If they come to a funeral home, you have to give that. So our cremation at our funeral home is $2,750. That includes everything from the basic services of the funeral director and staff, the cremation itself, the alternative container, which encompasses the body up till the point of cremation, transportation to and from the crematory, the cremation, alternative container, which was what I just said, and then also a temporary urn. That's what's included in that $2,750. If you die here in the state of West Virginia, there's a $50 cremation permit that I have to get from the state medical examiner's office. So $2,750 plus $50, that's your basic. So $2,800 will get you a cremation. Now, depending what you select regarding services, traditional service I'm talking about, the average funeral is somewhere between $8,000 to $10,000. So $2,800 versus $10,000. Today's time, a lot of folks, that's a big chunk. Regardless, and I always, financial stuff is not a strong point of mine. I hate taking a statement into a family and saying, because here's what you selected, your merchandise, and everything's itemized, and I go over that statement and tell them, if we need to change something to meet what you need financially, that's okay. We don't have to keep it how it is. And a lot of people probably wouldn't do that because a lot of folks are probably out for the buck. That's not me. I'm not there to hurt anybody. So we go over that, and I always hate saying, your cost is $9,850. Here is our financial policy. We do require at least half down on the day of arrangement. The remainder is due in 30 to 60 days. Or you can secure that with a life insurance policy. Now, regarding life insurance policies, those insurance companies are holding on to that money because they're getting interest off those accounts, and so they're making it harder for funeral homes to complete claims. So what we started doing, So what we started doing is we use a third-party insurance funding company. We submit the information to them. They go ahead and they front the money to the funeral home for those final expenses. Also, they go ahead and they front the family with the remaining balance of what would be left in that policy. So it's a lot quicker, but there is a 4% fee on the cost of the funeral. So it's not 4% on the face value of that policy, it's 4% on the funeral bill itself.
If a person chooses to be cremated and stuff, do they still hold a viewing service with that?
You can.
Do you?
Is it included in the 28? What is that? That's part of the.
No. So if if a family says, we want to have a traditional viewing, traditional funeral, and then cremation, something like that today. Of course, you're looking at more things to do. You got the embalming, you got the dressing and casketing, you got the use of the facilities for the visitation, the funeral, the ceremonial casket, memorial package, register book. So currently, an immediate cremation, no services, $2,800. Having a traditional viewing and a funeral and then cremation is right around $5,000.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's not too bad.
Yeah.
It's not, you still don't have to purchase cemetery plots, your vaults, nothing like that. You don't have to worry about opening closings, but you still have the availability to see your loved one. Now, that being said, it's encouraged through mortuary school and through grief counseling that, seeing your loved one brings more reality that death has occurred. And it helps that first step of grief, which is denial.
Yeah.
A lot of people deny that death has occurred. And some people, a lot of people say, just cremate me. I don't want any type of service. Don't want anything. Cremate me, give them the ashes and do whatever. Well, that's not going to help your family. So even if you do cremation, have some type of service for your loved one. Celebrate their life, because I can guarantee you it's going to help them in the long run. The funeral's for the living. A memorial service is for the living. To be so vague, can I say this respectfully? You're gone. There is nothing that we can do that's going to help you. This is what's going to help your spouse, what's going to help your child,
That's who has to do it with.
what's going to help them down the road. Don't prolong the grief just because you don't see any value in yourself. Does that answer?
Yeah. So I kept you here for an hour. Was there any final things there that we didn't get to on that you seen in your notes? Or I think we covered most of everything that they're going to have to talk to you about.
Yeah.
We answered a few questions. Obviously, price questions, all those customization questions. If you got questions about pre-planning, you can see Jonathan. You can see any of the other funeral directors in the county, and we've been to all those places. The last thing is just I want to ask Jonathan just to briefly, just for a few minutes, but what have you seen, especially during the funerals, or you've sat down with people or people coming to the funerals? Do you have any advice that you'd give to people who are coming there to support the family that's grieving, of things that's like, here's the things I have seen that has...
Don't do that.
Either don't do that. I was going to say what are really helpful, but yes, we could go that way as well and say, you're an idiot if you do this right here. Just some general advice on what's some things some people can do to walk through this with some other people who's
Sure.
dealing with it.
Sure. A lot of folks, they come out during funerals. We give hugs, we kiss, not kiss, but you give on the cheek, yeah. And then people leave, and that's it. So, after all these people have came through the funeral home, well, what happens after? 2 to 3 days down the road, a month down the road? Don't forget the person who lost somebody. Give them a call. Go visit them. Take them some food or take them out to lunch. Just don't let them isolate themselves. That's the biggest thing I can encourage. Everybody wants to support you whenever you're at the funeral home or at a church having a service, but then after the fact, there's nothing.
That's all right. So, very good. All right, any questions, any final things? We'll throw at him. All right. Yeah, let's give Jonathan a round of applause. Thank you for coming. Let's everybody stand again together. Again, I appreciate you guys being here all these 4 nights. I just pray that God would equip us to help us deal with this part of the life. So that's kind of what we're doing. And we have, if I don't kick this plane over, I did record each night. So we're not really publicizing them or anything like that. But if you missed any of the ones where we just talked about the biblical thing of death, I had Chris Skeens here with me. We talked about the grief share, which is the grieving part. I had Stacy Shamlin with me. Last week we talked about the legal stuff that you have to deal with. That was Susan Ransom was with me, and then Jonathan tonight. But if any of you want to watch that video again or need that sometime in the future, we kind of keep it private among the church, but we can send you a link to it or whatever, and you can review it. But
Hey, Joey.
yeah.
Regardless of what funeral home you choose, I do have, and I'm not here as a funeral director on behalf of Casto Funeral Home. I'm here as Jonathan trying to help somebody. I do have some books. It's called Putting My House in Order. These books are wonderful resources to kind of help walk through wills and purchasing cemetery plots. Also, you can record everything of your 401ks, your bank accounts, your life insurance, and you can record any wish that you want included in your final service. You can record in that book. Doesn't matter where you go, it's a great resource for your family. So if you all want some, please take them. Got some pens to even help you write in them. So encourage you to do that.
Cool. Good deal. All right. Again, remember the assignment. Remember what we're doing. We're just trying to be more like Jesus. And I know he attended some funerals. He knew how to help people through that. And any way we can be supportive to people and help them be more understanding of that, that's what I want to be. So let's just dismiss with another word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, once again, I thank you. I love all these folks, and I appreciate the time together. Thank you so much for it. I appreciate these studies each night. I know when you sent out your disciples and you sent them away, you sent them out as sheep among the wolves, and you prayed and you asked them, God, to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. And we're still wanting to be that today. God, we're just praying for wisdom. So God, we just pray you to help us be understanding of the world around us and what it's like, not because it's our home, but because we're passing through it. And God, we want to be as effective as we can while we're in it, because we know we're not of it, we're just here. But I pray for these. I pray for the people that Jonathan comes in contact with. I pray for the people in this congregation that they're going to walk through life with. And I pray that maybe we could be a blessing to somebody and a help and support, and also at the same time point them to you, because it's this important to us, Lord. So we love you and we thank you. And I'm also so thankful for this study that you can help us to deal with death. And I'm also thankful for the place we're going that we don't have to deal with it anymore. That's the best part of all of it. Thank you for dealing with this for us, Lord. We love you and we thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. Appreciate you all. Back to Men and Women's Bible Study next week. So you can tell all the other people they can come back to church now.